Good morning, you guys. Welcome to GDC Europe 2015, and thank you so much for coming out at this early hour. I appreciate it because I'm sure most of you were catching up yesterday night with friends and colleagues, and this might be hard to get out and come here at 10 o'clock. My name is Franzke, and I'm the lead programmer of Broken Age, or I guess at this point I should say I was the lead programmer of Broken Age now that the project is essentially over. So this is kind of unusual for me. I tend to speak about more technical topics. In fact, 2 years here at GDC Europe, I talked about some of the challenges we had with Broken Age and how we attacked them. But today I want to talk about something completely different and non-technical, but about a topic I think that is not talked about very often in the games industry, but it is of utmost importance, and that is leadership. So the title of today's talk is "So They Made You a Lead, and Now What?" So I really want to kind of look at what happens after you are promoted into a leadership position, and what is the best way to adjust to this role. But before I'm going to start talking about specific things and tools you can use, I would really appreciate to get your guys' help. It's early in the morning, you still got energy. So first of all, I would be really curious who here in the audience has any kind of leadership experience. Please raise your hand if that's the case. Oh, wow. Excellent. Awesome. Thank you. So then to kind of narrow that question, who here is new to a role with leadership experience? Who's been promoted in the last year or so into that role? OK. Quite a few people. Awesome. And then last question. I promise after that you can sit back and relax. I'm curious who here in the audience with leadership experience got any kind of preparation for this role. So did your company send you the course or gave you books or anything of that? Please raise your hand if that's the case. Oh, wow, OK. And to be honest, this is exactly what I expected. This is pretty much my own experience and also the experience of other people I talk to. It seems to be the general practice in the games industry to promote people into a leadership position without really much preparation, and people are kind of left to their own devices to figure out how to approach this role and what to do. And this is really hard, and I want to do everything I can today to make that much easier for you. And the most important thing to realize is that as a lead, you will acquire a completely different set of skills, and those are skills you will have to learn in addition to your kind of skill set you already have as an individual contributor. So, I assume you're, pretty senior programmer, artist, or designer, and you've been working in this field for a while, and so you are capable of making games, which is awesome. But now, as a lead, you will have to learn new things to be able to be effective in that role as well. And it might help you to know that most leads really, really struggle to adjust to this role. This is something that's really hard, and that's why I don't really understand why there's so little guidance provided by most companies for new leads. But the most important message here is that it is possible to learn these skills and to become a very effective lead. And this is what I want to talk about today, and hopefully provide you some tools to do just that. Now, before I'm going to talk about, again, responsibilities and tools, I want to very briefly talk about my own leadership story. Because leadership is a very personal skill. Every lead will approach this role in a slightly different way. There's no single template that you can use to become a good lead. And therefore, what I'm going to be talking about later on really depends on my own story. So my leadership story began just essentially shortly after I joined Double Fine Production in San Francisco, when the project lead for the 360 Connect game, Once Upon a Monster, that we were doing in collaboration with Sesame Street, asked me whether I want to be the lead engine programmer on this project. And I was excited. This was something I always wanted to explore, and I had it for the longest time on my CV as a career objective. I want to become a team lead. So I said, yes, awesome, I will do that. And I accepted the job. Came into the office now with my new job title as the lead engine programmer, sat down at my desk, and I really didn't quite know what to do and how my role was supposed to change. In fact, the other day I was going through some old photos, and I found a picture of myself from exactly that time. Look at that guy. He's all excited, but he really has no clue what to do. So this was really kind of how I felt at this position as well. Now, obviously, I had supervisors in the past, and I realized that, some of the supervisors I really liked and I found them very effective, whereas other bosses I had in the past I didn't really like, and I thought they weren't really good as leads. But what does this really mean? What does this boil down to? What did these people do differently? And so I started to think a little bit about the kind of situation in a team. And I noticed that for a supervisor that I thought was really good as a lead, it seemed like team morale was generally really high. People were happy. They knew what we were working on, and people were generally pretty enthusiastic. And for me personally, I always felt that my work really mattered in those teams, and that made raised my own morale and meant that I was spending a lot of my brain power working on these things. But then I also had, bosses that I didn't like, and what I noticed there was almost the opposite. Team morale was generally pretty low. People kind of complained about things, and there was a lot of gossiping going on. People weren't really too happy to work on that stuff, and a lot of times people would be checking Twitter and Facebook and do other things. And for me personally, I always felt that my work didn't really matter as much. So why am I even here? Maybe it's 5 o'clock. It's time to go home. But really, we kind of want to be more like this guy. So how can we do that? So after Once Upon a Monster was over, I realized that if I want to accept another position as a lead on a project, I really should spend more time learning about this, because I felt I wasn't really effective first time around. And so this is really the foundation for this presentation. And I want to provide you guys with kind of like a beginner's guide to leadership, and what you can do, hopefully, to hit the ground running and become a good lead, and so that you don't need to struggle as much through these kind of early difficult times. But first, we should ask ourselves, why is leadership even important in the games industry, right? Because if you work for a standard games company, chances are there's probably not much in terms of organizational structure. You're gonna have maybe one supervisor, but then the next level up, it's probably going to be already the CEO or somebody else in the studio management level. So it's very flat in terms of company hierarchy. And at the same time, you're probably going to be surrounded by people who have similar age than you, similar cultural backgrounds, similar interests, and it's going to feel like you're just sitting there with a bunch of buddies working on a game. And that's awesome. I mean, that's what makes the games industry so fun, and that's why I was sticking around in the games industry for such a long time. But in a way, projects that we're working on these days become bigger and bigger, and there's more and more money involved to making these projects. And in order to make those, we need interdisciplinary coordination. We need to make sure that your team is very effective. So that means if you are a lead and you're responsible for a group of people, then really you should take this role very, very serious, because you actually are way more important than you might realize. The stakes for you doing your job well are actually pretty high. Because as a good lead, you essentially make everyone on your team way more effective than they could be on their own. And on the other side, obviously, as a bad lead, you can do a lot of damage. So let's start out by looking at some of the kind of core responsibilities that you will have as a lead. And these are responsibilities that were added to your plate to what you were already doing before. So I think one of the first and most basic responsibility is to establish an environment of trust. And this is important because now that you are a supervisor, you kind of stepped out of this role of being a peer, right? When previously it was okay to gossip and complain about things when things didn't go well, as a lead, you really have to work hard on communicating very professionally. This is not okay to be negative and gossip, because this will project you in an kind of as a person who's not very trustworthy, because if you gossip about other things, how can people know that you're not going to gossip about them as soon as they leave the room? So this is something you will have to work on, and you really want to create this environment because you want to make sure that people on your team can feel comfortable coming to you even with negative news. Let's say someone on your team recognizes there's some kind of problem that will put the next milestone in jeopardy and perhaps will have a knock-on effect on the entire production schedule. If you're known to your team as somebody who, first of all, is not approachable and generally freaks out when there's bad news, chances are this person will not come to you with that. And this means you will hear about it when the situation is already pretty dire and you have to go into crisis management mode. So we don't want to be there. You want to create an environment where people can really feel comfortable coming to you. But this is something that doesn't happen automatically. And I'm going to talk about later on how to work on this. So now that you are responsible for an entire group of people, that also means, obviously, you're responsible for the entire workload that this entire group of people has. And it generally is very helpful, or you should really, define a direction for your team. And this means, having both a short-term as well as a long-term plan. Short-term plan could mean, the next month or two, and long-term plan is something like the kind of goals you want to achieve with your team within a year or until the end of the project or something like that. Wow. And this should really culminate in a very concise vision statement. And let's say you are lead of a tools programming team, then a good vision statement would be, as a tools group, we want to make sure that every asset change that gets made by one of our content creators gets reflected in the engine in 5 seconds. This is great. It's very specific. Everybody can understand what this means. It's challenging, and it should be. This is a good vision statement. Now, the vision statement is something you shouldn't just keep to yourself. This should be something you really should, communicate to everyone on your team and people outside of your team. And it's really important for people on your team because when people work on tasks, on a day-to-day basis, they might need to make a decision whether not go down this way or that way. And you want to make sure that people can make this decision with the long-term plan in mind, because it will make a difference. But probably one of the most important responsibilities you have now, and that's something that's often overlooked, I think, is to support your team. So when I before I became a lead and thought about leadership, I always envisioned more like a traditional pyramid, right? You have the lead on top and then a whole bunch of people underneath it. And if you, do Google image search for leadership, you'll find images like that. Where I personally found in the games industry, in this kind of creative environment, it's actually almost the other way around. It's a flip pyramid where you are there to lift up your team, to make sure that your team can be successful, right? Your job is to make sure that everyone in your team can achieve the goals that you specified. And this can mean, can be as simple as providing everyone with the hardware they need or software they need. But it could also mean, provide guidance for someone who is struggling to work on a task, or maybe someone has problems, working with work performance and doesn't quite know how to learn a certain skill. This is your responsibility too. And some of you might now wonder, what about my actual job, right? And this is a question I heard a lot when I talked to other leads or former leads about their experience. Very often I heard things like, I really like being a lead and I really like being involved in some of the more important project-wide decisions, but all of these meetings and helping people and writing reviews, I really don't know when I'm supposed to do my actual work. And this is, I think, one of the biggest misconceptions when it comes to leadership, in games at least. Because as a lead, leadership is your actual job, right? This is really essential. If there's only one thing you take away from this presentation, then leadership is your actual job. All of these meetings, writing reviews, talking to people, all of that stuff, this is your main responsibility. This is what you're supposed to do. And it means that in reality, you obviously have less time for project tasks like programming, creating artwork or designing things. So make sure to take this into account, and because you will have, only up to 50% on a big teams, even less time than that available for these kind of tasks. So keep this in mind when you give yourself work, so you don't overcommit yourself, because that will mean that you're going to be doing a lot of hours, and therefore you're going to be stressed out and probably not going to be doing a good job as a lead. And being a lead should always come first. So, but what about, specific tools? What can we do to become a good lead? Well, unfortunately, there is no individual single secret to good leadership. Despite what some Google searches will tell you, there is no easy 10-step program to become a good lead, or an easy 15-minute video you can watch that will make you a good lead. You really have to learn these skills and improve them. And I really like Mike Acton's quote from GDC earlier this year in San Francisco when he said, if you absolutely must have a formula for doing your leadership work, here's mine. Figure out what doesn't work and do less of that, and figure out what works well and do more of that. And this is something that really resonates with me, because just like in other things in life, you're never done becoming a lead. You're not get a certificate, you achieve maximum level lead. This is not World of Warcraft where you can max out. You will always have to work on that. And that sometimes mean, taking a step back and reflecting on what you're doing and how effective that is. But let's finally get started and let's look at what you can do. So I think, especially if you really new to being a lead and you've just been promoted, I think one of the most important things you can do is actually find a mentor. And a mentor is someone, in this case, that you really respect for his or her leadership abilities. It doesn't necessarily need to be a supervisor. If you're, again, coming back to the example of a tools programming lead, if you notice that someone in the art department is doing a fantastic job leading this team, everyone is motivated, pulling in the same direction, and the team is generally doing amazing work, then encourage you to go to this person and ask him or her whether or not it's okay to come by every once in a while and ask questions about leadership and kind of how to work on some of the problems you encountered or some of the difficult situations you didn't quite know what to do. Being able to benefit from someone else's experience is really invaluable, and I wish I would have done this way more in the beginning. But even if you feel like you can't find someone in your own organization that you can talk to for whatever reason, I encourage you still to reach out to someone in the games industry. Like, for example, the Australian game developer Zach Duff did when he sent John Romero an email after he was promoted into an art leadership role. And this, reflects my own experience, because after I realized that I should learn more about leadership, I spent a lot of time, first of all, talking to my tech director at work, but also sending emails to people in the games industry that I really respect for their leadership work and asking them questions about certain things I wasn't quite clear about. And I think I learned a lot through these kind of email exchanges. Now, it probably doesn't come as a surprise that communication plays an important role when it comes to leadership. In fact, being able to communicate effectively is probably one of the key skills you will need. If you don't communicate, you cannot lead. But this means you should really work on being able to represent information in a concise way and in such a way that it's tailored towards the person you're talking to. If you are again, tools programming lead, and you're talking to someone in the art department, you probably want to present that information slightly different than if you talk to someone on your own team. And I think something that is often kind of done wrong, or maybe it's kind of difficult for new leads, is to realize that it's okay not to know everything right away. I think there's sometimes this pressure as a new lead to have an answer for everything. If somebody comes to you, asks you a question, you're like, oh, I don't really know, but I think it's like that. It is totally okay to say, I don't know that right now, but let me, talk to some people who know, and then I'm going to come back to you. This is, a really important aspect. Now, other aspects for effective communication that are important are these. If you notice something that isn't working well, don't wait for somebody else to fix the problem. Be proactive. If you notice something and you can, fix it yourself, do that. If you can't fix it yourself, bring it up with the studio leadership team and make sure that these things get addressed. Also, being transparent is, even more important now as a lead than it maybe was previously, because things will inevitably go wrong, and maybe your team runs into a problem that you couldn't anticipate, and you're not going to be able to, meet your milestone goals. Don't, conceal this information or try not to talk about that. It is always better to be upfront. Let the people know who will be affected by the information and concentrate on finding a solution rather than kind of hiding this or finding someone to blame for this mistake. And then lastly, I think something that's really important also, be clear, when you communicate, and make sure that everything is very explicit, because your team or other people, in your company can't read your mind. So if there's something that you want to say, make sure to, again, present this information in such a way that people will be able to understand that. Now, something that I think that I underestimated in the beginning is how important listening is when it comes to leadership. In fact, I would argue that listening is actually more important than talking. In my mind, when I thought about leadership in the beginning, was a situation like where I'm going to be standing in front of a group of people and I'm going to, be giving a speech, and then people are so inspired, they run off and do amazing work. And that's great. If you can do that, fantastic. But I think the more important aspect is actually to gather information. And that means you have to learn how to listen effectively. And there's a saying that as a human, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. You should use them in that ratio. And I think that very much applies in the games industry. But what are some specific things you can do to work on your listening skills? Well, first of all, you should probably, spend more time asking open-ended questions. And open-ended questions are questions that can't be easily answered with yes or no. So with these questions, you're essentially inviting the person you're talking to elaborate a bit more on the topic you're talking about. And this will give you a lot of valuable insight into not just yes and no, but also what is happening, why is it happening, and this is very, very essential. But let's look at a very specific example. So let's say we have a situation where a feature needs to be added for the next milestone. You could ask this question in an open-ended form, and you would do it like that, for example. Hey, what do you think about this feature, and how long will it take to implement? Now compare that to the closed form, which could sound like that. We're going to add that feature. Can you get it done this sprint? Now, the difference kind of might seem very subtle in the beginning, but if you use the latter form, you're essentially dumping some work on someone else's plate, right? And then asking him or her whether or not they can get it done. Chances are this person will probably not be too happy about it because he already had a lot of work and now he has more. And the question is just can you get it done? So you're not going to be as invested. Now, asking this as an open-ended question, you will actually get way more information out of it, and you will actually hopefully get to a situation where this person is kind of more invested in this feature because you're asking for help for scoping and asking an opinion on that feature and what it means. Because maybe there's something you weren't aware of that actually going to make this feature much more complicated to implement than you initially thought. So this is a really easy thing you can do. Another very important listening technique that becomes specifically helpful in situations where there's a potential for miscommunication is active listening. So this is really important when you're having difficult conversations or in situations where conflicts need to be resolved, because any miscommunication at this point will probably lead to a major blow up. And the idea here is to essentially restate or paraphrase what you heard the other person saying back to that person. And this will mean that your communication partner can hear what you think he or she said. And if there's any disconnect between the two messages, then hopefully the person you're talking to can clear this up right away, and you won't spend half an hour talking about something completely different. So this is something you may have already noticed some of your supervisors doing that, and you may have never put a word to that. In fact, as GDC speakers, we're often invited to kind of repeat the question back, in the Q&A section. I guess here the main idea is to make sure it's recorded with the camera, but it's also, helps in the same situation that you kind of make sure that I really understood the question, and maybe, it's because my mental context is going to be different from yours. So this is where this becomes really helpful. And both of these listening techniques, are essential for one of the most important tools as a lead that you can probably have, and that's one-on-one meetings. Because now that you are responsible for an entire team and leading a team, that means you really have to know your team, right? You have to know what they're good at and not so good at. And this also really means you need to work on this kind of trust relationship that I was talking about earlier. And this is where one-on-one meetings become really helpful. So the idea here is that you meet with everyone on your team on a regular basis. I generally, follow a monthly schedule. So every month meet with everyone on your team for half an hour or so. And there's this tendency or this danger to potentially skip these kind of meetings because that, maybe the project is at the end, it's kind of getting stressful, or maybe it seems like there's not much to talk about. Don't do that. Get in the habit of doing these. It's okay to just have a meeting for 5 minutes, totally fine. But, just get in the habit of doing that, because once you break the cycle, it's going to be much easier to just completely forget about it. And I don't think that's a good position to be in. And it's important also to make sure to have these meetings at a location where you both can feel comfortable talking about potentially sensitive topics. So in a meeting room in your office obviously works. A nearby coffee shop also works, as long as neither of you have to feel like kind of worried about somebody else from the company walking in and overhearing things that he or she shouldn't hear. Now, one thing that's, I think, often misinterpreted when it comes to one-on-one meetings is what you should talk about. And it is really important that one-on-one meetings are not status updates. The goal of this meeting is not to talk about, hey, how are your tasks doing, and are you going to be done on time? This might be an opener, but this should not be the core of the message. You should, really spend time talking about questions like, do you enjoy your work? Where do you want to be in 5 years? Is there any skill you want to learn? If there's one thing you could change in the project right now, what would that be? And these kind of questions to get information are really the things you should be talking about. And lastly, when it comes to one-on-one meetings, make sure you're really listening and you're really there. And I don't just mean physically. Don't have these meetings where you can potentially get distracted. Don't have these meetings in front of a computer where you can see email notifications popping up. If you have to take your mobile phone into the meeting, switch it off so you can't see any notifications popping up. Because nothing, shows disrespect more than having this kind of half-assed conversation where you're just kind of responding like, while you're writing emails. Not very helpful. Because the goal is here to make sure, that the person feels important and valued. And that's how it should be. If you don't think that's the case, then you may want to reconsider your position in generally. And if there are things that you agree on in terms of specific action items, like if we want to send you to a course, we want to send you to GDC, make sure to write these down and then also send an email to the person so both of you have kind of like a written down version of what you agreed on. Okay, so another thing I think that's very hard sometimes for new leads is dealing with expectations. And I think it is really important as a lead to set very clear guidelines with your team. And this is not micromanagement. This is something where you want to make sure that everyone on your team knows the things that would frustrate you if they wouldn't be done well. Because what would happen otherwise is that people, provide work that you're not happy with, and you're going to either have to talk to this person, ask for changes, which is going to make, this person feel unhappy because it's something, this person might not be aware of, and you could have easily, done it the correct way the first time, or even worse than that, you go in and fix it yourself, which is going to make you appear like a really horrible micromanager. So this will really, help your team to know what, the kind of contract is between you and your team, and it will also help yourself because you're going to be way less frustrated when it comes to, checking our work. Now, obviously, there's also the problem of work, right? As a lead, you need to make sure that everyone on your team has something to do and that the work gets done. And for that, you will have to distribute work with your team. Now, I found as a new lead specifically, the easiest way to kind of get used to the idea of delegation is to have this kind of sprint planning meeting. So the idea here is to get everyone in your team into a meeting room and then first talk about all the things that were done, for the previous sprint, all that stuff that get done, and, also the stuff that didn't get done and why it didn't get done. And then, talk about the specific things that need to get done for the next sprint. And at this point, let people grab tasks and like say, oh, this is something I'm interested in. I would like to work on that, and just let people roll with that. And this hopefully going to lead to a situation where people going to have mostly tasks that they're happy about and enthusiastic about. Now, there will be tasks obviously that nobody wants. You will have to assign them. That's part of your job. You could take them yourself, but always remember, don't overcommit yourself. And one thing here that's important, I think, is as a lead, you should really work on helping your team to think to the tasks. So, while you're having this meeting, ask probing questions like, oh, have you thought about multiplayer? How will that work? Or, what about split screen? These kind of questions, obviously, the questions have to apply to your domain, are what's going to help your team to think about potential dependencies that, they might not have thought about up to this point. But delegation goes further than just distributing work. Delegation is also, about trusting your team and the importance of realizing that your team are the domain experts. These are the people who are, working on the systems and working in individual tasks all the time, and they might know things that you don't know. And that's totally okay. So I think it's generally a good practice to get your team involved when it comes to questions about these systems or features or tasks and scoping and everything related to that. I think I made this mistake in the beginning where somebody from the audit department came to me and asked me a question about the limitation of the audit system. Now, I'm not usually the person who works in the audit system on a day-to-day basis, but I had enough knowledge to answer the question. So I thought to myself, all right, well, let's not get the team distracted. I'm just going to answer that question. Now, what I didn't realize is, or should have realized at this point, that the person who is actually working the audio system all the time was sitting nearby and overheard this conversation. And from this person's perspective, it appeared like I'm not trusting this person with this question. And that's not a good position to be in. Again, establishing trust is really important. So, get your team involved in these kind of things as well. And then the last thing I want to mention in relation to delegation is that it's also a fantastic tool for skill development. And this is something that might kind of seem counterintuitive at first, but let's assume for a second that you're an art lead, and for the next milestone you have to model an orc for your game. Now, at first glance, it might make sense to give this task to somebody who has already, modeled 10 orcs for the previous game and is super experienced with that. But you previously hired a junior artist, and from your one-on-one meetings that you're having now all the time, you know that this person is really interested in character modeling and is really enthusiastic about the topic in general. And so in this case, if time permits, it actually might make sense to give this task to the more junior artist, because it means this person can learn the skills, which is a great long-term investment for just the kind of general skill level that your team has. And it also means that this person will probably work on this task really highly motivated and will, put all of his creative energy into that, into, getting this task done. In contrast, if you would give this task to the person who is really experienced with that, they're going to be like, I've done this a bunch of times. I'm going to get it done, but I'm not too excited. Because generally, people don't really enjoy working on repetitive tasks. I'm sure you notice with yourself that you really, probably prefer to leave work at the end of the day realizing, I learned something new. Working on some exciting new things. And this is the same here as well. So it's good to kind of remember that. Okay, so now that tasks are all given out and everyone on your team is doing something, your job as a lead is obviously not done. As a lead, you represent your team, and that means, in kind of project-wide meetings, you will have to know not just what your own task load is and how things are going with your task that you grab, but also what the rest of the team is doing, right? That seems like it makes sense. But I think as a new lead, sometimes this is a dangerous place to be because, like I said earlier, this kind of my actual job syndrome kicks in. Because everyone is working, you kind of have the feeling, I really should start working on my things too. And you kind of start forgetting a little bit about your leadership responsibilities. And it's only natural because, you came out of a role as individual contributors, so you kind of are very used to working on that. So make sure to also allocate time to stay up to date with what's going on. And there are different ways to do this. Some people like to read the Perforce check-in comments. If you have a producer going around checking on tasks anyway, have a coffee with the producer. Or, of course, just walk around yourself and ask people what's going on. And in addition to learning kind of what the progress is, this will also help you to realize if there are any problems that are developing. And hopefully you're going to hear about them soon enough or early enough that you can easily fix them. Okay, so this is probably one of the hardest things you can learn or have to learn as a new lead, and that's the importance of providing feedback and how to provide feedback. And this applies both to kind of praise on the positive side and as well as criticism on the negative side. Let's start, by talking about criticism. And, as a lead, obviously you're responsible for what your team does, and this means that if there are things that are not going well in your team, you will have to deal with that. So let's assume for a second someone in your team keeps breaking the bill, despite the fact that you explained that this is not a good thing and it will actually make everyone on the project unhappy and stop them from working. And you explained that the best way of not running into this problem is to check the changes locally before checking them in. But it keeps happening. So at this point, we'll have to deal with this, right? And this is, let's be honest, this is not going to be fun. This is not going to be a happy conversation, and probably not going to be one of the greatest days of your life. Who knows? But the important point is that you will have to address this problem. Now, one of the most important things here when it comes to criticism is to never have these conversations in public. So don't go into the cubicle or work area where this person is working and kind of start this conversation there. Because what will happen at this point, it will put the person you're talking to in a naturally defensive stance, because this person is going to be worried about not, losing respect in front of his or her peers. And this is not going to be a very productive conversation. So instead, get a meeting room in the office and have this conversation there. And at this point, it is really, really important to approach this conversation with empathy. You're there to support your team, and this means also helping people if they have problems. Because I would assume that, if you have a kid, you're not going to threaten your kid with firing him or her from the family just because he's not turning in English homework, right? Instead, you're probably going to be, asking, what's going on? Is there anything I can help you with so that, we can work on this together? And that's exactly what you should do here as well. First find out what is going on. Maybe there's, something you weren't aware of previously. Maybe it's something in a personal life that, makes this person very distracted. Whatever it might be, find out what's going on, and then with this person, talk about a specific plan, what you can do to get out of that situation. Make a plan, agree on it, and then once you're done, write up notes and send it as an email to this person so that you both have something written down form, what you agreed on. And after that is done, make sure to check in on this person and follow up on the kind of development, and hopefully, or not hopefully, provide help and support where necessary to make this person to get out of this problem. Now, obviously, there might be a situation where things are even worse, and I hear this question a lot about like, oh, but what if I need to get a person fired or something like that? In my experience, this doesn't happen very often. And this is really one of the most extreme cases. And I think as a new lead, I have not talked to a single person where that was really necessary, so I'm actually going to skip over that. But if you want to talk about that later, please come to me after the presentation, and we can talk about that as well. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, there's also praise as a form of feedback. And sometimes as new leads, I think it can be also tempting to concentrate on the negative things, on the things that are not going well. And by doing that, sometimes new leads forget about praising people. But praise is something really important. Most people really want to know how they're doing, and they want to know that they're doing well. So just a few little words like, oh, well done, you did a great job at that, actually go a long way. And in contrast to criticism, it is totally okay and actually encouraged to praise people in public. So if you, for example, have a project-wide meeting where you're representing your group, please feel free. If there's something really good that happened during the week, mention that and say also who's responsible for that, because it will boost team morale, and that's very important for your productivity. And sometimes I heard the question, I was like, but I never remember at these meetings what happened. I'm kind of on the spot, so everything is a bit chaotic. For me personally, it really helped me to have a piece of paper next to my computer, and I would actually write down all the good things that I noticed happening during the week. And this is great. At the end of the week, I guarantee you have a nice list that first of all going to make you feel very good because you realize that your team was really productive, but it's also going to provide you with enough points to talk about during these kind of meetings. Whew. That's a lot. So some of you may now say, wow, man, this leadership thing is actually pretty hard. It seems like, a lot to learn. Maybe there are some things in there I didn't really realize, and I should really do all those things. And yeah, it's true, like becoming a lead or adjusting kind of from this role as an individual contributor into this leadership position is really, really tough. But it is important to remember that this is not impossible, and you can, become a great lead if you work on these skills, apply them, and then, again, take a step back and kind of think about how well this works and then adjust your strategy. I like Brian Sharp's quote from a talk in 2012 at GDC about leadership, where he said there's this kind of misconception that comprehension also equals mastery. And that's really not true, right? Because just because you read all the books about leadership or, came to all the presentations, by the way, thank you for coming to this presentation, doesn't necessarily mean, that you're also automatically going to be a fantastic lead. You really, have to apply these skills and work on it, and rather than hoping that you're going to be just like all the inspiring leads that you see around you, practice is the only way to get there. And all the things that I talked about today are really just the beginning. This is just kind of the basic steps, the kind of foundation that you should have as a new lead. And this is really, an exciting step for you in your career, right? Being in this position where you now have this responsibility and you have an entire group of people that you're responsible for is fantastic. And it is actually, to me, still amazing when I realize at the end of a milestone, like how much work got done. You know, the entire team, you know, was working in a aligned fashion. Everyone was super productive, and it's just kind of such an amazing feeling to be there. So being a lead is awesome, but it is work. And this is really all I want to talk about today as kind of the basic steps. So thank you very much for listening. And I want to leave you with the most important leadership tip from Captain Picard, and I'm open to answering some questions if you have some. Thank you. Ooh. Okay, I'm running a bit early, so I need to come to you if you ask a question. Right. So the question is, like, if you become a lead, and finding a mentor is really important, but you can't find someone in your company, what should you do in this case? Yes, this is really important, and I think what you should do in this case is actually to reach out to somebody in the games industry who you noticed, you know, gave talks on the topic at GDC, or who you noticed kind of through other forms that, you know, they were doing a good job or appear to do a good job in terms of leadership. And in my experience, I actually did exactly that. You know, write this person an email saying, "Hey, I'm new to the role of leadership. If you have the time, I would really appreciate if you could answer a bunch of my questions that I have." And then just, you know, not bombard them with questions, kind of space them out, but you know, ask these questions. And in my experience, people are very, very generous. And you know, I think since it is kind of a taboo, or seems to be a taboo topic in the games industry, and people don't really like to talk about it too much, individuals are really helpful because they've been through that themselves and they realize, oh, you know, I should do everything I can to help other leads. And another thing you can do, so I have some of these things. So at the end of the presentation, if you download them, there are a bunch of resources that you may want to check out. There is actually relatively good material, but it's certainly nothing that gets, you know, discussed all that often. But yeah. Does that answer your question? Okay. Oh, yep, over here. Oh wait, there's a microphone coming.
Hi.
Hey.
Thanks for the great speech.
Thank you.
So I have a question about code observation. So most likely during your work you are checking a lot of code written by your teammates. So how much time does it take usually from you? So what's the time budget for that? Mm-hmm. And how do you usually feedback what you are checking? So that's the question. Thank you.
Yeah. So the question is specifically for programming, you know, when it comes to code quality or the stuff that gets checked in, like how much time should you spend, or how much time will it take to kind of look at all the things, and how should you provide feedback on that? Yeah, is that right? Okay. You know, this is something that kind of depends on you. I think some leads, program leads, have a different standard, kind of what they find agreeable. And obviously, as a lead, you should make sure that the code is not completely crazy, right? But it kind of also depends, you know, you get a feeling for how people on your team work. So, you know, I guess in most cases what happens, probably most of you have experienced this, there's some kind of coding standard that gets specified. And this, you know, very much ties into expectations that I was talking about earlier. I think it really helps if this is something you really care about, that the code is structured in a very specific way, because otherwise you're going to be unhappy. Then make these very obvious, make these clear. You know, write these down, have a document, and tell everyone on your team, like, here are the coding standards, please follow those. And, you know, also obviously make it possible for people to provide feedback. If it's completely unreasonable what you're asking, then people should, you know, be able to voice that concern as well. In terms of how much time it takes, I mean, that really depends on you. I generally like to check in on perforce check-ins every once in a while. I just kind of see, you know, the list of check-ins to go in, and generally I look at what's happening. I kind of, you know, look at files more that are really kind of have the tendency to cause a lot of damage, more than with other files, and also depending on maybe who checked stuff in. But I can't really give you a specific time. You should spend 3 hours a day doing that. It's really hard. I had one of my supervisors in the past. He literally checked, I don't know how he did, every single purpose check-in. Even when he was on his honeymoon, I still got an email from him, like from Denmark. Hey, I noticed you did that. Is this really intended? So, there are different scales. You have to kind of figure out what works for you. And if people, start grumbling on your team that you're too precise, make sure that you have very, reasonable expectations there. Is that okay? Does that answer your question somewhat? Okay. Oh, over here? Yep, it's coming.
Thanks, Oliver.
Yeah.
Actually, I have two questions, if that's all right. So the first one is about delegation. If you have a large team, you usually want to delegate tasks, but you also want to maybe improve the skill set by your team by doing that, or challenge them, and so on. I always found it tempting to connect these delegation tasks to actual career goals of the people who I'm delegating tasks to. So sometimes if someone wants to get promoted and, well, I think, okay, there's this task I would like to delegate to someone in the team, and this person wants to get promoted. I kind of link these two things together, and I say, well, it's a win-win situation. You can get promoted after a certain time, or it's one of the things that I think could be useful to you in your development. And usually that's something that I sometimes found a bit difficult, because I thought, well, I'm asking this person who asked me before, and I delegate this to him, but maybe another person in the team would be suitable as well, and I'm not considering him because this makes it so much easier for me, and also this person is, of course, so much more motivated eventually because he wants to get promoted.
Okay, so the question is, when it comes to delegation, is it okay to connect things like promotions to kind of tasks you perhaps want to give out and don't want to deal with yourself? Is that about?
I mean, well, I have good experience with that. I just wanted to ask how you are handling it.
Right.
Is that something you had in the past, or that was useful in certain situations?
I think what is really important in these situations, I mean, as you pointed out correctly, delegation is a great way for skill development, and sometimes if you have some type of skill set or something that somebody needs to learn, then this is a great way to get them used to that. Even if it's something that you realize this person really should know that because they want to be a senior programmer or something like that, and they really should know these things, even though they might not realize that right now. But I think what you should do before you do that is actually talk to this person about their kind of general career plans. And, have a one-on-one meeting and talk specifically, okay, let's talk about, are you happy with your role? In 2 years down the road, would you be happy still being a standard programmer, or do you want to be a senior programmer? And, if the person indicates that you want to kind of rise in the hierarchy, then make a plan. Make a specific plan of things that you seem important. You should work on this, should work on your communication skills, should work on the specific skill set that you will need. So you have a general plan, and then this can tie into specific delegation tasks. Because what will happen in this case, you can say in this case, when we talked about, all the things that you should do in order to get promoted, this is, I think, a good task for you to attack. So this is a way to approach it. But yes, I mean, delegation is sometimes hard work, specifically when it comes to things that nobody really wants to do, but you just want to get them off your plate. Unfortunately, you don't have the benefit of doing that. You have to deal with these kind of tasks as well.
Okay, thank you. The other one is about one-on-ones. Sometimes in one-on-ones, you start talking about other team members. And that's always a bit tricky ground, I would say, because actually it's quite usual to, for example, speak with a senior about the new junior in the team. So that's you can ask him how he's doing and all that stuff, because maybe he's mentoring him, all that. The other way around, you can also do that, of course. But my question is what you do with that information you get. Because I do all these one-on-ones every month, like you do. And I have all this very specific information about career paths and so on, and this is, of course, confidential. But when it comes about information, what people think about others, I learn a lot, very useful information, and sometimes I don't know how to use it, because when the team is rather small, it's very obvious where the information comes from in certain cases. So Do you have any advice to this situation?
Yeah. So the question is, in one-on-one meetings, or I guess generally talking, to your team, if somebody else comes up on a team and you want to talk about this person either doing a good job or not a good job, what do you do with this information? And you're right, this is a very tricky ground. And the first, the most important rule here as a lead, all this information you're getting is confidential, even if this person doesn't explicitly say, oh, please don't let anybody else know. So I would argue personally, under no circumstances, go and to this other person and say, okay, I heard just from someone that you're doing a horrible job programming this feature. Sometimes this is just information that you get, and it's sometimes as a person who's working, you just want to get it off your chest, right? You're kind of really frustrated. Maybe somebody is making your life really difficult. One thing that's already going to make them feel better is just being able to voice that. Now, obviously, there are mortalities to that. If you're in a situation where somebody is actually making somebody else miserable, then that becomes a problem. Let's say somebody is showing some kind of racist kind of tendencies or sexism or anything like really bad things that could happen. You will have to deal with that. And in this case, what I would do in this meeting when I'm talking about the person who brings this topic up is to say, okay, well, this is really bad, and I think we really need to deal with this. Is it okay for me to confront this other person and talk about it and explain that this is not a good thing? And just be sensitive, because this, as you said, especially in small teams, it becomes kind of difficult. If it becomes really major and you just notice it in the open, then you should bring it up anyway. You can say, I was walking around and I noticed you were making a really disrespectful comment to someone. This is not okay. This is not how we communicate on this team. And again, be really clear. This is, again, something that's not going to be fun, but, you will have to just, clench your fist and say, this is not okay. This is not how we communicate. Please change this, because otherwise, we have to, use more drastic measures like a warning or something like that. But again, treat all this information with confidence, even if it's not explicitly mentioned, I would say. Okay. Somebody else? Oh, back there.
Hi.
Hey.
How would you encourage proactivity? Because sometimes people on your team might not do that by themselves, and it's of course something that you would want to see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is a real hard one. So the question is, how do you encourage proactivity in your team? Because this is a good skill, and you want people to kind of, if they see something going wrong, to kind of solve it themselves rather than waiting for somebody else to do it. I think in a lot of ways, this also kind of ties in to something like career development. So, let's say you have a one-on-one where you're talking about, okay, where do you want to be in a year or 2 years down the road? And this person says, well, I want to get promoted. This is a great point to say, well, fantastic, and here are a few things to talk about. And I think one of the things you could, be better at is actually being proactive. And if you see something that's broken, don't wait for somebody else to fix it. If you notice it yourself, this is something that senior programmers, artists, designers do, go and attack these problems by yourself. So sometimes this helps by kind of pointing out that this is part of the kind of skill set that's necessary for some of the more senior roles. Other than that, I had this experience myself. It's sometimes hard because sometimes people say they really want to do something, and then I, for example, had a programmer who wasn't too happy, doing all this kind of scripting, gameplay work. And I said, okay, what are you interested in? Would you be interested in doing some tools work? And the person said, yeah, that sounds awesome. I would love to spend more time with that. And I said, okay, well, let's try for the next sprint. I'm going to put you in charge of the tools. So you're going to do all the things that you seem necessary and make sure that our team has what they need. And then you kind of observe. Obviously, if something is going horribly wrong, you should step in. But just kind of see what happens this way. In this case, this person realized that maybe he wasn't too interested in working in tools. I don't know, because there wasn't that much happening. But try to encourage it this way as well. I think that's another good way. Just giving people more responsibility, just to see also how they're going to be able to deal with that. Is that okay? Answer question? Okay. There's another question somewhere. All right. Well, if there's nothing else to talk about, then again, thank you so much for coming out, and I hope this helped you. Thank you very much.